They never found fingerprints on the knife because there was no knife.no gun. No scream. Just crumbs on a porcelain plate and a room that smelled like sugar, butter, and something bitter hiding underneath. On a cold evening in occupied Poland, laughter echoed inside a Gestapo building where laughter did not belong. A birthday was being celebrated. Candles flickered. A woman stood near the table, hand steady, smile polite, heart racing so loud it felt like it might crack her ribs. She had baked the cake herself. Thick layers, too sweet, almost clumsy. The kind of cake people underestimate. The kind that disarms you. The first officer joked that it tasted strange. The second asked for another slice anyway. By midnight, boots were scraping the floor, chairs tipped over, and men who had tortured entire neighborhoods were suddenly clawing at their throats like frightened children. This is not a clean hero story. This is not bravery wrapped in a flag. This is hunger, rage, calculation, and fear baked into flour. And before you decide how you feel about what she did, stay with me, because the part nobody tells you is why she never planned to survive the night. Before we go any further, if stories like this matter to you, stories that dig under history instead of polishing it, subscribe to the channel now. Comment where you are watching from, because these stories traveled borders long before the internet did, and your voice keeps them alive. This one especially. Because it does not behave. It does not ask permission, and it will sit with you long after the screen goes dark. Her name did not appear in newspapers. That was intentional. In Warsaw, people whispered it wrong on purpose, like a superstition. She worked where the Germans did not bother to look closely. Kitchens. Pantries. Back rooms that smelled of boiled cabbage and soap. She learned early that monsters relax when they think they are being fed. She heard things while pouring tea. Routes. Names. Which officer liked his coffee sweet? Which one could not resist cake? She joked with them, stiff and careful, using broken German, letting them correct her. Letting them feel smarter. Outside, the city was starving. Inside, she memorized everything. The cake was not her first plan. It was the last. The easier options had already failed, messages intercepted. Couriers shot. A child beaten because she had looked at a soldier too long. On the morning she decided, she did not cry. She stood in line for rationed flour and thought about her sister's hands after the interrogation. Shaking. Useless. She bought extra sugar on the black market and paid too much. The poison came from a contact who would not give his name. He told her not to taste the batter. He told her once it starts, there is no stopping it. She nodded like someone agreeing to the weather. The officers did not suspect a thing. That is the uncomfortable truth. Evil is often bored, not alert. They sang. They drank. One of them bragged about a village that no longer existed. She smiled at the wrong moments and corrected herself. When the first man collapsed, she felt relief before horror, and that scared her more than anything. By the time the room descended into chaos, she was already backing toward the door. Not running. Walking. Like someone late for work. Here is the twist that ruins the clean version of this story. She did not escape because she was clever. She escaped because someone else made noise in another part of the building at exactly the wrong moment. A distraction she did not plan. A variable she could not control. History loves to pretend this was fate. It was not. It was luck colliding with desperation. And that matters, because in the next part, you will see what that accident cost her, and why the cake was never meant to be remembered at all. She did not run because running makes you visible. She walked through the corridor with the same measured pace she had practiced in her head 100 times, counting steps between doors, keeping her shoulders low, eyes unfocused, like a woman whose only crime was wanting to go home. Behind her, the sounds were changing. Panic has a rhythm. First confusion, then shouting, then the wet, animal noise people make when their bodies betray them. Someone fired a gun into the ceiling. Someone screamed for a doctor who did not exist. The smell followed her, metallic now, sharp, crawling into her nose. She focused on the feel of the floor through the thin soles of her shoes. If she slipped, if she looked back, this would end right here. Outside, Warsaw was holding its breath the way it always did after sunset. Curfew turned streets into stages for shadows, she blended into them, turning corners she had memorized, cutting through a courtyard where a cat watched her with open suspicion. Only then did her hands start to shake. Not fear. Something worse. The release after choice. Once you decide to do a thing like this, your body carries you. When it is done, everything crashes at once. She did not go home. Home was a mistake people made when they wanted comfort. She went to a laundry basement near the river where steam covered sins and faces alike. The woman who ran it did not ask questions. She never did. She handed her a towel and a chipped mug of something hot. They listened to sirens that were not meant for help. In that basement, the woman with the cake learned the first consequence. By morning, the Germans would not be hunting a baker, they would be hunting a ghost. And ghosts get people killed. The official report said sudden illness. Then sabotage. Then nothing at all. 30 officers did not simply die. That would imply weakness. So the numbers changed depending on who you asked. 12. 15. A few. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Some said the cake had been meant for one man, the worst of them, and the rest were accidents. Others said she had smiled too much, enjoyed it. Those stories were useful. They kept the truth slippery. They also reached the wrong ears. By the third day, reprisals began. They always do. A neighborhood sealed off. Men lined against a wall because someone had to pay for the humiliation. She watched from a window she did not recognize, heart pounding, jaw locked, and understood the second consequence: the math of resistance is never clean. You trade one horror for another and hope the balance tilts someday. People like tidy heroes. They do not like this part. They do not like knowing she considered turning herself in just to make it stop. She didn't, and that choice haunted her more than the cake ever would. She moved constantly, sleeping in fragments, learning new names like changing coats. The resistance argued about her in rooms she never entered. Some called her reckless. Others called her a symbol. She hated both. Symbols do not wake up screaming. Symbols do not flinch when a door slams. She was still just a woman whose hands smelled faintly of sugar no matter how much she scrubbed them. Then came the message that rewrote everything. Slipped into her pocket during a bread delivery. 4 words, written badly, like a child had rushed them. They know it was you. Not suspect. Not think. No. The third consequence was clarity. There would be no quiet ending. No disappearance into folklore. And in the next part, you will see the decision she made after reading that note, the one that split the resistance itself and forced her to choose between surviving and finishing what she had started. She burned the note over a candle stub and watched the paper curl like it wanted to crawl away. Knowing changes posture. It makes rooms feel smaller. It makes every sound carry intent. She stood there longer than she should have, letting the ash fall into a saucer already crowded with other people's secrets. Then she did the thing no one expected. She went back toward the danger, not away from it. The resistance wanted her hidden. Buried in a farmhouse, shipped east, erased. They spoke in clean verbs. Extract. Preserve. Relocate. She listened, nodded, and lied with her face calm. Because the message wasn't a threat. It was a clock. Someone had seen too much. Someone was talking. If she vanished, the Germans would squeeze the city until something broke. If she stayed visible, she could pull the pressure onto herself. That was the logic. Brutal. Unromantic. Hers. She cut her hair shorter and took a name that tasted wrong in her mouth. She stopped baking. Flour had become a tell. Instead, she carried crates at dawn, learned which alleys smelled like cabbage and which smelled like fear, learned who flinched when uniforms passed. She found the man who had slipped the note by accident. He was a courier with hands that shook and a mouth that ran. He didn't deny it. He cried. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness is a luxury during occupation. The trap formed slowly. Not poison this time. Noise. Misdirection. A trail of small, believable mistakes. A crate misplaced, a conversation overheard, a meeting that seemed too open to be real. The Gestapo liked patterns. She gave them one. Meanwhile, she fed the resistance something harder than hope, time. Each day they chased her shadow was a day fewer doors got kicked in at random. They took the bait on a Thursday. A warehouse by the tracks. Floodlights snapping on like accusations. Boots, orders, metal clatter. She was already gone, slipping through a gap she'd measured with her shoulders a week earlier. The raid looked successful from the outside. Inside, it was empty air and anger. That anger would look for a face. They found one. Not hers. A young man with a red scarf who shared her accent and none of her choices. They beat him because they could. She learned about it before dusk. The fourth consequence landed heavy: you can plan perfectly and still miss the cost. She sat on a step and counted breaths until the world steadied enough to move again. That night she broke her own rule and went to someone she loved. Not for shelter. For honesty. She told him everything she hadn't told anyone: the cake. The note. The trap. He listened without interrupting, then said something that cut cleaner than any accusation. You're not trying to survive anymore. He was right. Survival had become optional. Meaning had not. By morning, a new order circulated. Her name, one of them, printed wrong but close enough. Dead or alive. Reward attached. She laughed once, sharp and short, because it finally matched the scale of what she'd done. And then she made the decision that would turn allies into enemies, the one that would make historians argue and commentators flinch. In the next part, you'll hear how she chose exposure over secrecy, and why that choice saved lives while costing her the last illusion she had left. Exposure is a strange weapon. It doesn't explode, it corrodes. She stepped into it deliberately, like cold water you don't acclimate to, you let it shock you so the nerves wake up fast. She resurfaced in plain sight, not loud, not theatrical, just present. Same streets. Same hour. Different posture. The city noticed before the Germans did. That was the point. She let rumors run ahead of her, crooked ones. That she'd been compromised. That she'd flipped. That she was reckless now. People who needed certainty hated her for it. People who understood misdirection leaned in. The resistance argued in whispers and slammed doors. She listened and kept walking. Strategy, when it works, feels like betrayal to everyone standing too close. The Gestapo circled. Surveillance got sloppy because urgency makes men lazy. She used that. Not with poison, not with bombs, information. She leaked truths that were almost true, dates that were off by hours, names missing a letter. Raids hit empty rooms. Arrests came late. Each miss widened the gap between what they thought they controlled and what they actually did. Control hates embarrassment. A message reached her through a woman who sold soap that never smelled clean. The young man with the red scarf was alive. Broken, but alive. She closed her eyes and felt the relief burn through the guilt instead of canceling it. That balance, holding both, became her daily ration. It kept her sharp. Then the twist no one planned. Berlin intervened. New officers, new methods, less patience for local games. The reward doubled. Posters corrected the spelling. A sketch appeared that caught the angle of her jaw too well. The city went quiet in a way that meant listening. She understood the signal. Time was running out again, but this time it wasn't hers alone. She met the resistance leaders and said the sentence that detonated the room. She would surrender. Not immediately. Not publicly. On terms. She would feed the machine something it couldn't digest cleanly, a confession that implicated the wrong people in the right ways, a narrative that forced resources inward instead of outward. Half the room called it suicide. The other half knew better and hated agreeing. The handoff was brutal in its simplicity. A café. A nod. A coat left on a chair. She walked into custody with nothing hidden except the truth. Interrogation followed the script until it didn't. She answered enough to sound useful, refused enough to sound principled. They couldn't decide which version scared them more. Days blurred. Questions repeated. Threats escalated and then softened, which told her exactly where she stood in their hierarchy of needs. Valuable. Dangerous. Not yet expendable. She held that line like a wire under tension. And when the first convoy failed to arrive on schedule because men had been reassigned to chase a single woman, she smiled into the dark. What comes next isn't a rescue fantasy. It's colder. In the next part, you'll see how her surrender fractured the system just enough, and how a single administrative decision, made far from the cell where she waited, changed the math of the war in that city. Systems don't collapse from heroics, they fail from paperwork. She learned that between interrogations, in the pauses where guards argued about forms and signatures like they mattered more than bones. Somewhere above her head, an administrator decided which boxes to tick, which units to pull, which files to prioritize. That decision, small, bloodless, rippled outward. Her surrender created a gravity well. Reports stacked up. Requests duplicated. 2 departments claimed her case, then neither wanted to release it. Jurisdiction became a knife fight with pens. Men who hunted partisans found themselves escorting folders. Trucks idled while orders were clarified. Radios crackled with irritation. Efficiency bled out through 1,000 tiny cuts. She fed the machine just enough. Names of places already burned, routes already abandoned. She corrected mistakes when they made her look careless, then introduced new ones that sent teams chasing ghosts. Each answer was a thread, she pulled carefully so the fabric tore where she wanted. They mistook her cooperation for capitulation. That mistake cost them time. Outside, the city shifted. Raids thinned. Curfews loosened by minutes that felt like hours. Couriers ran again, not bravely, cautiously. The resistance adapted, learned to move with the gaps she opened. No speeches. No statues. Just movement. Survival with intent. Then came the transfer order. Signed, stamped, irreversible. She would be moved to a facility farther west, away from the neighborhoods she knew, away from the damage she could still do. The paper smelled like ink and inevitability. She read it once and felt the weight settle. This was the price of becoming useful to your enemy. They eventually try to store you somewhere safer. The night before the transfer, an officer visited her alone. Not cruel. Not kind. Curious. He asked why she'd done it, the cake, the lies, the surrender. She didn't give him a speech. She told him the truth he could carry without changing. Because you made us choose between being quiet and being alive. He left without replying, which was reply enough. The convoy rolled at dawn. Gray sky. Wet streets. She counted turns by feel. Halfway out of the city, a delay. Not dramatic. A bridge inspection. Paperwork again. Engines off. Voices raised. She waited, breath slow, hands still. This wasn't an escape. It was an interruption, shots cracked in the distance, too far to see, close enough to hurry decisions. Orders reversed. The convoy split. In the confusion, a truck peeled away with fewer guards than planned. She noticed the missing detail instantly. Someone had learned the language she'd been speaking all along. The door opened once, just long enough for a face she recognized to nod. No words. No gratitude. She stepped down into the morning and disappeared into a crowd that hadn't been there a minute earlier. The city had remembered her. In the next part, you'll hear what survival looked like after the myth caught up with the woman, and how being known became more dangerous than being hunted. Being known is louder than being chased. After the convoy fracture, her name stopped being a rumor and started being a shortcut. Doors opened too fast. Help arrived unasked. Eyes lingered a second longer than safe. The myth outran the woman, and that made every step heavier. She learned to walk like a stranger in her own streets, to keep gratitude brief and trust transactional. She moved nights. Changed routes mid-block. Slept in rooms where the walls remembered other lives. The resistance tried to put her back in a box, symbol, weapon, warning, and she refused all three. Symbols get paraded. Weapons get pointed. Warnings get ignored. She wanted leverage, not applause. The Germans adjusted. Less noise. More patience. A different hunt. Informants surfaced with clean shoes and hungry stories. She tested them gently and watched where the lies leaked. The city had developed a second pulse, markets that breathed when uniforms turned corners, whispers that traveled faster than boots. She learned to listen for the absence of sound. Silence meant fear. Fear meant a net. A courier brought bad news wrapped as good. Berlin wanted results. Someone had promised them a head. Not hers, too obvious now, but someone adjacent, someone who could be called a victory. She recognized the shape of the move immediately. Decapitation theater. She spent a night mapping who would be easiest to sacrifice and hated herself for how quickly the answer came. She chose to break the myth on her own terms. A public mistake. A visible loss. She let a meeting get burned and made sure witnesses saw her leave empty-handed, furious, human. The story shifted. Not invincible. Not omniscient. Just another woman running out of options. The pressure eased a notch. Sometimes weakness is camouflage. Then the letter arrived, folded wrong. An offer that wasn't an offer. Work, protection, erasure. The price was silence, real silence this time. Names locked away forever. She laughed once, because the machine always believes everyone has a price it can afford. She wrote back 3 lines, none polite, and handed the paper to a boy who didn't know how brave he was yet. The retaliation was swift and stupid. A sweep at dawn. Wrong addresses. Angry officers. 1 death they didn't need and 2 arrests they couldn't justify. The city recoiled and then hardened. That's when she understood the turn had come. Not victory. Momentum. Enough to matter. She left again before nightfall, carrying nothing she couldn't drop. As she crossed the river, she felt the old instinct return, not survival, not meaning, but something sharper, timing. In the next part, you'll see how timing, once seized, can end a story without ending a life, and why the aftermath was quieter than anyone expected. Timing is invisible when it works. It feels like nothing happened, which is how you know it mattered. She didn't trigger a finale. She shortened endings. She took advantage of fatigue, theirs, not hers. The occupiers had burned through certainty and were now running on procedure, and procedure hates surprises that look ordinary. She stopped acting central.no meetings. No messages with weight. She let others carry the noise while she handled the margins, where supplies crossed ledgers, where guards swapped shifts, where a single signature delayed a convoy long enough for weather to do the rest. It wasn't glamorous. It was precise. Precision ages well. A cease in raids came without announcement. Not peace, absence. Markets reopened a fraction. Trams ran a stop farther. People noticed but didn't name it. Naming invites correction. She watched from a window that wasn't hers and felt something unfamiliar loosen in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or the danger of believing. The resistance argued about what came next. Always do. Some wanted escalation while the ground was soft. Others wanted to vanish into normalcy before the ground hardened again. She sided with neither. She mapped exits. 4 people, 4 records, for herself. Ending a chapter doesn't require burning the book. The Germans made one last push for narrative control. A statement drafted, never released. A trial postponed, then cancelled. They needed a clean story and couldn't get one. Too many threads refused to tie. When they pulled back, it wasn't defeat, it was reprioritization. Wars don't end, they redirect. She left the city the way she'd learned to do everything else, without ceremony. A train at a bad hour. A seat near a window that rattled. She carried a small tin with nothing in it because it reminded her to travel light. Outside, fields slid past, indifferent and intact. She slept for the first time without counting. Later, much later, someone would ask her if it was worth it. She never answered directly. Worth is a word for people who expect symmetry. She measured outcomes. Fewer boots at dawn. More names that never made lists. A system that learned to doubt itself for just long enough. In the final part, you'll hear what survived when the smoke thinned, not the myth, not the monster, but the woman, and why the quiet after the story is the hardest thing to live with. Afterward doesn't arrive with music. It comes as inventory. What remains? What's missing? What you refuse to touch. She learned this in a town where no one knew her face and the bread tasted like flour again. Days filled with ordinary labor. Evenings with silence that felt earned and accusatory at the same time. People tried to find her. Not enemies, curators. Journalists with clean questions, veterans with dirt under their nails, young radicals who wanted lineage. She said no until no became a habit. The story had done enough damage. Let it rest. Let it blur. Truth survives without applause. At night, memory tested her with precision. The cake appeared sometimes, not the act, the smell. Sweetness is stubborn. She would wake and sit until the room returned. She didn't confess to regret. She catalogued it. Regret, like guilt, is information. You keep it close so you don't repeat yourself. Years later, the war would be taught in diagrams and dates that made sense on paper. Her part would be a footnote if it appeared at all. She liked that. Footnotes are where the real mechanics live. She read once that history favors the loud because quiet can't be quoted. She disagreed. Quiet outlasts quotation. Once, in a market far from where it began, a man recognized her eyes and then decided not to. He bought apples. Paid too much. Left without a word. She understood the gift and carried it carefully for the rest of the day. She never baked again. Not because of fear. Because some tools belong to a season and should stay there. Instead, she planted things that took time and failed often. She learned patience without strategy. That was the hardest skill. If you stayed to the end of this story, you know why it matters. Not because of the poison or the officers or the myth, but because one ordinary woman learned how systems break, and chose where to apply the pressure. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't flatter power, comment if you want to argue with the choices, and remember this: the next time someone tells you history only turns on battles. Sometimes it turns on a kitchen, a decision, and the courage to live with what comes after.